Welcome to Off the Shelf. Tonight, I'm reading what's left to Chapter 7 of Resident Evil Zero Hour. Enjoy! The young man had moved to a place where the hive could comfortably gather. A large space. Warm and moist and far from the possibility of daylight. The many surrounded him now, singing their tuneless song of water and darkness, but he was not soothed. He'd watched with cold fury as the girl, Rebecca, the killer had called her, and his cursed name was Billy, stole Marcus's journal, slipping it into a pocket before leaving the office. This wasn't why he'd had the desk open for her, not at all. The map of the observatory. She was supposed to take only the map. The two met now in front of the portrait doorway, both speaking at once, surely relating their findings, their murderous exploits. He could see the thief and the killer on a video screen at one side of his new environment, a lower level of the treatment plant. But he could see them better through the dozen pairs of rudimentary eyes watching them, the children peering out of them from the shadows. The minds of the many were powerful, able to send messages to one another, to him. It was how they could work together so effectively. Rebecca and Billy had no understanding of how vulnerable they were, of how easily he could reach out and take their lives from them. They survived still, only by his grace. A thief and her murdering friend. Billy had killed a colleague. He'd burned it. The few survivors were still straggling home to their master, their poor bodies scorched, showing him the death of the whole by their lack of cohesion. How had he dared, this unimportant man, this insect? Rebecca held out the maps and they both studied them, too stupid, surely, to know what was expected of them. The observatory was the key to their escape, but they would undoubtedly try the basement first. It was just as well. He was no longer sure he wanted them to go free. They started down the stairs, disappearing from the screen, from the many sight, only for a second. As the couple came back into view through another camera, they stopped, staring down at the litter of arachnid bodies, dead and curled on the floor. There were 4 of the giant spiders, all killed mere moments before, eliminated so that Rebecca and her friend might avoid their poisonous bite. The spiders were another experiment. One doomed to fail, too slow, too difficult to handle, but lethal enough for the young man to have been concerned. He was sorry now. Watching the thief and murderer die would be his pleasure. In spite of what it did to his plans for Umbrella, the couple moved on, unaware that they were being watched by the cameras that had killed watched by the creatures that had killed the spiders, who nested in the swollen, segmented bodies even now. What to do? Killing them would fulfill a need in him. The need to avenge the lives of the children. The need to assert his control. But exposing Umbrella was the priority, bringing the company to ruin by laying open its stinking heart, which Billy and Rebecca would surely do if they survived. The pair followed the corridor to its end, then through the door of a long abandoned office. After a brief consultation with their map, they continued on into a dead-end room where live specimens had once been kept. The cages were long gone. The room empty now. The young man wasn't sure why they had chosen a dead end, until he saw them move to the northeast corner, both of them looking up at the dark rectangle near the ceiling. The ventilator shaft. It wouldn't have been labeled on the map. Perhaps they believed it to be a way out. In fact, it led to... The young man shook his head. Dr. Marcus's private chamber. The room where he'd once entertained certain attractive young test subjects. Why couldn't they simply leave? They'd find nothing in the private room. Nothing. Unless the ventilator shaft was connected to another live specimen area, one that wasn't empty. And the creatures there hadn't been fed in days. They would be very hungry by now. All he'd need to do would be to have the mini unlatch a gate or two, rather than consider them an integral part of his plan. Maybe he should think of Billy and Rebecca as test subjects. They might die, which in truth would probably only delay Umbrella's exposure for a short while. He was impatient, but he had to consider the entertainment value. Or they might survive, in which case they'd have an even greater story to tell. The young man smiled his blade of a smile as Billy gave Rebecca a boost. Lifting her up to the ventilator shaft, she crawled inside, disappearing from view. Wouldn't they be surprised if a few of the leftovers from the primate series showed up to play? Around him, the children cooed. The walls, the ceiling dripping with their slippery fluids, surrounded by the many, the fate of Umbrella in his hands. And now 2 little soldiers for him to test, to enjoy watching as they pitted their abilities against the remnants of Umbrella's bioorganic weaponry. He was happy. Would they live or die? Either way, he would be satisfied. "Open the cages, my darlings," he murmured, and began to sing. Well, I finally got through chapter 7, and sooner or later I'll get back on another chapter of this book. And for Off the Shelf, I'd like to bid you good night.